Hello and welcome. In this video we are going to look at how to transfer other users' keys for SSH. If you've seen my other video regarding generating users' keys, I did mention I wanted to create a separate video on this because as an administrator, yes, you'll end up having to do this. So we'll look at how we can transfer SSH keys for other users. Now this does assume you already understand how to create keys and transfer keys for yourself. We're just making the assumption you've done that. If you haven't, do feel free to go and watch my video on that. But once you've done that, you might have taken the extra step to set up your server so that it only allows authentication using keys. This creates a problem because then users can't transfer keys themselves. So we'll see how we can do that for them. So this, that is setting up your server so that it only allows key-based authentication, not password-based, and then transferring those keys for our users is going to help keep our network under our control. So before I even start, I'm going to go to demo here, and I have made some minor changes to the SSH service here since the last SSH video. So if we take a look at etc ssh sshd config, the major changes that I have made is under allow users, I have added normal user, so they should be able to SSH in. And if I scroll up a bit, I have changed the password authentication parameter that defaults to yes, that is, that allows password authentication. I have changed that to no. You are not allowed to use a password to try to log in. You must use a key. And of course, I've already restarted my server and tested that to make sure that it works. So now our other users are going to need to have keys in order to log in. So first, they need to create their own public and private key pair using the SSH keygen command. I'm not going to cover this here. I've already covered it in another video. If you want to go back and look at that video to refresh yourself on how to do this, feel free. I'll be here when you get back. But once they've taken that step, they're not going to be able to use the SSH copy ID command because our server is preventing password-based authentication. Let's see this. Over here on demo 2, I've logged in as normal user. If we take a look in my .ssh directory, I've already generated those keys using the default file names. So I've got id_rsa.pub. And if I try to SSH to demo, permission denied. And if I try to SSH copy ID to demo, permission denied, because that server is not going to let me use password-based authentication. So I need to, well, Norm needs somebody else to transfer the key for them. And I'm sure there is somebody saying, wait a minute, you could just make your server allow password-based authentication for a minute, let them transfer their key, and then, set it back to being key-based authentication. That could work, but it's the wrong way of doing this. You would be temporarily undermining the security of your server to transfer this key. The better way is keep the security intact and use an admin who already has key-based authentication set up to transfer the key. So Norm is going to have to ask for an admin's help to transfer their keys over. So I'm going to switch over to being an admin. And I'm going to grab Norm's public key. And that's an important point on the slide here. make sure you're grabbing the public key, not the private one. when you have that key, it's going to go on the server in that user's home directory, whoever they are, in a subdirectory .ssh, just like our own key went into, and inside that subdirectory in a file called authorized keys. And just like I mentioned in the video about setting up your own keys, the permissions and ownership of these files are really important. The .ssh directory must be owned by this user, permissions 700, and the file itself, the authorized keys file, must be owned by that user. Group ownership must be their primary group, and the permissions must be 600. That is, they can read and write, nobody else can. So back on demo 2, logged in as an admin, I'm going to grab Norm's key. And of course, I'm trying to access somebody else's home directory, so I will need elevated permissions. So I'm going to cp from normal user's home directory .ssh id underscore rsa .pub. Make sure we get the public key, and I'm going to grab that here as norm key. And now I have norm key. That's a public key, just like we saw in the other video. And it's for normal user at demo 2. So now we need to take this key and transfer that over to demo, which an admin can do because their key is already set up. So I will scp norm key to demo norm key. Using my existing key to be able to authenticate the transfer that over, and now the key is over on my remote machine. At this point, I don't want to keep this key anymore. At least not on demo 2. Over on demo, an admin now has this norm key file. There it is, there's that public key. So now we need to get that to that user's home directory, well, the subdirectory of their home directory called .ssh, in a file, authorized keys. If that authorized keys file already exists, you could just VI it and paste this in. In this case, it doesn't, so I'm going to have to create these files first. So I'm going to sudo make directory in norm al users home directory .ssh, and then I will sudo move this norm key file over to that directory authorized keys, and double check your spelling because it would be really easy to make a typo here and have the whole thing not work. So now, I don't have that file anymore. It's now in Norm's home directory over there. Of course, as I mentioned, the permissions and ownership are really, really important. And I just did that operation with elevated permissions, so that all belongs to root right now. Belongs to root, and everybody's got read and execute permission for it. That's not great. And if you look at that authorized keys file, again, owned by me, or an admin, and has the wrong permissions. So we need to fix that before this will work. So I'll sudo change ownership, norm, al user, norm, al user, if I spell that right. So user owner and group owner are that person, and we're looking for that SSH directory. Rather than having to do this repeatedly, I'm just going to make this recursive. So that directory and every file in it should be owned and group owned by normAll_user, or whoever the user we're doing this for. Next, I need to change those permissions. So I will sudo chmod 700 that SSH directory, and 600 the authorized keys file. And I can just use my command history to double check those permissions. Now it's owned by normAll_user, group owner normAll_user, and permissions are norm has read and write, nobody else has any permissions, and the SSH directory there, again, user owner and group owner are normAll_user, permissions are that user has read, write, and execute, nobody else has anything. With that done, we can head back over to demo 2, log in as norm, and SSH over to demo. Be prompted for the passphrase that we entered when we created that key. And now norm has key-based authentication to that server. So, in this lesson, we've looked at how we can transfer SSH keys for other users onto our server that is already set up to use key-based authentication without undermining the security provided by key-based authentication. This is going to help you protect your networks from unwanted access. That is, now if somebody wants to log into your server, they need that SSH key and they need the passphrase associated with that key. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.